that logistics center and get some. The departure would be tomorrow morning. If Jongyum did this for him, Big Boss promised to accept him as a member of their family. He asserted that the group could protect the young man from monsters like that oversized wyvern outside. Unfortunately for the Big Boss, Jongyum had stopped listening to him yap for a while now. He was wondering what to put inside his subspace, and it seemed like fate had just handed him the perfect place on a silver platter. Ignoring the people around him, he spoke to Pax and requested that the Joint Command Communications headquarters be stored in the subspace. Confused by Jongyum's words, Big Boss threatened to kill the young man. Before he could even finish his threats, his office had already vanished. The entire military base was erased as if it had never existed in the first place. Big Boss looked around in confusion. The only thing left from his stronghold was the office chair. It was like a fucked up dream. Every personnel inside the military base camp looked up in confusion as the ceiling turned into the open sky. Big Boss is as confused as his men. He looked around, trying to make sense of the situation, but there was no reasonable or logical explanation for it. Amidst the confusion, Kim Jongyum silently endured the drawback of his ability. Just like when he stored Pax's facility, he was suddenly assaulted by the side effects of storing a massive complex in his subspace. He needs to cut his restraints quickly while all the guards are distracted. Distraction quickly turned to fear when the rebels saw the sky darken. Countless silhouettes of massive wyverns filled the airspace, and they were inching closer by the second. Led by the leader of the pack, the wyverns steadily descended for the human meat free-for-all feast. Its mighty roar reverberated throughout the area, a terrifying display of dominance. Afraid of getting caught and eaten by the draconic beasts, the rebels scattered as they ran for their lives. Jongyum managed to summon an axe to cut himself loose. Big Boss reprimands his idiotic crew to stop running and shoot instead. They just need to take down the smaller wyverns before handling the big one with their numbers advantage. They might not be able to get the job done with guns, but he is confident in his own ability. Maybe his plan could have worked if his men listened, but they didn't. Everyone left their boss to fend for himself. Unfortunately for the Big Boss, he has been marked by the largest wyvern of the pack. Standing face to face, he cannot help but feel awfully small in front of the colossal beast. Big Wyvern gave the Big Boss a cursory glance, but something shinier caught its attention. A few meters away, Jongyum opens his subspace while carrying the tortured soldier on his shoulders. The subspace recognized the soldier as Han Hyung-ho, and Jongyum granted him permission to enter. As soon as they set foot inside the safety of the subspace, the young man felt dizzy and lightheaded. He managed to sneak out in the middle of the chaos, but he really needs to take account of the after-effects of subspace storing. If he suffers the dire side effects in a critical moment, it could be dangerous. Jongyum turned to look outside and saw the curious wyvern staring directly at him. There is no telling what the beast is thinking about. But one thing's for sure, the curious stare made Jongyum uneasy. This staring contest is interrupted by a pesky bug trying to square up with the giant wyvern. Big Boss clenched his fists and started pounding on the monster's body with all his strength. He cursed at the lizard bastard as he threw multiple punches. He was quite confident that he could stand against such a beast after leveling up a little. He wanted to show that he was built different compared to his cowardly crew that had run away. Jongyum gave the pathetic Big Boss one final glance as he walked deeper into his subspace. The worried Lee Yong-soo hurriedly met him at the entrance. Aside from the headache and exhaustion, Jongyum felt fine, but the stranger he brought in was not. All they know is that Han Hyung-ho is a soldier who was tortured by rebellious gangsters, and he's in critical condition. For now, they have the bloodied soldier situated in one of the rooms. Jongyum pulled off a great escape, and he finally breathed with relief. Inspecting the soldier's injuries, it seems like the gangsters did not inflict any major wounds or bleeding. From what Jongyum heard, Han Hyung-ho was already in bad shape due to starvation. Malnutrition and torture are a tough combo to suffer from. Changing the subject, Jongyum asked if a new building had appeared somewhere in the subspace. Yong-soo confirmed and curiously asked what that was about. It just appeared beside the facility so suddenly, confusing Yong-soo and his family. From the outside, it looked absolutely massive. Even Jongyum himself was shocked at its size. When he brought the military base inside, he did not expect it to be so big. He was blindfolded when he was taken and never got to look at the exterior. Jongyum was eager to check on something, so he asked Yong-soo to watch over the injured soldier for a bit. Yong-soo thought he had already seen the extent of the young man's ability, but absorbing a whole military base was just insane. He wondered what Jongyum was planning with it. The exterior of the military base was so spacious that he had to bike around the field. While pedaling, he thinks of the endless possibilities and use cases that the military base brings. Guns, ammo, explosives, gas masks, and even military vehicles are now accessible. It's the perfect arsenal to survive in this apocalyptic world. But unlike his logistics center, using the base might be more of a hassle. In the center, Pax handles everything automatically. Shipping things out can even be used as a potent weapon. But the guns are in the armory, and the ammo, magazines, and explosives must be stored securely. If they need something from the base, they might have to fetch it themselves. Finding out where everything is housed will be a problem. The base is way too big to explore and catalog. Even if they find the weapons and ammo, there's still a bit of a problem. Even if he armed Yongsu, the lack of combat experience will be an issue. He reckoned that securing tons of firearms would not be as valuable without the proper personnel to utilize them. Taking the guns out and assembling them would be a pain. More importantly, the military supplies are not infinite like in the logistics center. They need to be cautious and wise in using limited resources manually. Pax interjected to debunk all of Jongyam's assumptions. The whole subspace is programmed with the logistics system format by Pax's AI. So, the recently added Sector 2 is being treated as a warehouse and storage accordingly. Jongyam stopped pedaling in shock at what Pax was implying. Currently, a classification system is underway. Once the process is complete, Jongyam will be free to use the items from Sector 2, just like the ones in Sector 1. Pax is basically saying that the rifles and ammo can also be duplicated and shipped out. The drone gave him a happy smile, confirming how OP the subspace really is. The young man is still reeling from shock. However, as Pax mentioned, the classification process is still ongoing, and Sector 2 is inaccessible at the moment. Current progress is at 0.81%. It's difficult to provide an exact estimate of the processing duration as time varies depending on the items. Thankfully, Jongyam can pick the items he wants to prioritize to be assigned with product codes first. When asked for his priority list, he immediately rattled off rifles, ammo, grenades, vehicles, and fuel. He is not messing around. With priority assignment, the product codes for the items listed will be available within 10 minutes. Jongyam also added a restriction to block other people from ordering items from Sector 2. Pax easily added the order restriction. It's not that he does not trust Yongsu and his family. It's just better to err on the side of caution, especially with the unconscious soldier with them. With weapons and vehicles ready, Jongyam opened his portal while hoping that the chaos had settled down outside. Jongyam came across a scene straight out of a gory horror movie with the wyverns happily feasting on human flesh scattered all over the place. He was banking on the situation resolving itself, but that does not seem so likely now. There are far too many monsters to try and shake off, and escaping from the big one is practically impossible. So the only option he has right now is to lock in and finally use his new weapons. Yongsu and Jongyam geared up in the face of adversity. It has been ages since Mr. Lee Yongsu graduated from the reserve forces, yet here he is, shooting once more. Plenty of magazines have been packed in boxes, so they shouldn't run out of rounds. If the gun jams, they can just toss it away and grab a fresh one. It would have been nice if the loaded magazines came pre-attached to the guns, but that's not how the system registered them. When the young man asked the old-timer if he could shoot, Yongsu smiled confidently. Unk finally has plenty of living targets on which to test his reservist skills. He was built for this. Since seeing is faster than explaining, he took one of the guns and aimed at the beasts. The muzzle fire lit up the dark and gloomy battlefield as a rain of bullets showered the voracious wyverns. Against Yongsu and Jongyam's bullet hell, the small ones bled and died on the spot. Who would have thought that Yongsu is not just a badass driver? He's a wyvern-killing John Wick too. They quickly went through dozens of magazines and hundreds of rounds without stopping. The duo picked off every enemy they could spot with precision. It helped that the big-body wyverns were easy targets. The sound of incessant gunfire finally halted. This was Yongsu's first time doing a real rapid-fire shoot-around, and it was tougher than he expected. It seems like they have succeeded in getting the situation under control for now. Sure, they managed to take down most of the pack, but Jongyam still felt uneasy. At first glance, it looked like not a single wyvern could have withstood that onslaught of shots. While Jongyam confirmed that the small ones had been annihilated, the big one's body was nowhere to be found. He was sure that the leader of the pack was still somewhere out there. And he was right. The crafty lizard was hiding right behind the subspace portal. It did not make a sound at all, as if baiting the humans to come out of hiding. Wyvern corpses joined the humans they preyed on in the afterlife. No matter how hard Yongsu looked around, he could not see the leader of the pack. Jongyam devised a plan to confirm their suspicions. Since the wyvern leader might spawn camp them from outside, they can just send a remote-controlled toy as bait first. If there's no reaction, they can finally move comfortably. But if the beast shows up, they have to deal with it decisively, much like a beehive that overwhelms its target. But a remote-controlled toy might not be enough to force the monster to attack. So Jongyam proposed a brilliant idea. On top of multiple remote-controlled toy cars, they fastened a mannequin that looked human enough on top. Slowly but surely, they sent the bait out of the portal and into the dark. 2 seconds in, the giant wyvern struck down with brutality, tearing the mannequin dummy into pieces. The plan worked, and they managed to smoke the hidden enemy out. Done with hiding, the beast showed itself before the duo. Its empty and predatory eyes stared deep into their souls. Realizing that it had been tricked to attack a dummy, the beast roared with wrath. Jongyum regained his composure and took aim, eager to make the monster eat his bullets. He urged the dazed Yongsu to do the same, snapping him out of a daze. When the bullet hell restarted, the wyvern took the brunt of the attack at close range. It started falling back bit by bit as the fiery barrage continued. By the time they ceased firing, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Behind the smolder was a pair of enraged eyes, hell-bent on killing. The wyvern lunged forward to counterattack, ready to tear its enemies apart between its sharp fangs. Unfortunately for the apex predator, no amount of brute force can bypass the portal's security system. After bumping into what seemed like an immovable wall, the wyvern felt odd. The duo was just flabbergasted that the beast was still standing after their concentrated storm of destruction. Can you imagine how thick that monster's hide and scales must be? Jongyum recalls hearing Big Boss mention an odd detail about the giant wyvern. His boys tried to attack the pack, but they felt like their attacks were being blocked by an unknown power. That must mean that the beast outside is not deflecting the bullets with just its tough body. It's more like something is blocking their attacks. Infuriated, the apex predator unleashed a guttural war cry, seemingly calling the humans out to play fair. Jongyum responded by throwing a fucking hand grenade. Wyvern looked below and curiously analyzed the green ball rolling on the ground. The young man is down to crash out and find out which is stronger, the monster's defense or humanity's weapons of war. With a limitless supply of weapons and explosives, Jongyum can do this all night long. After the first explosion, multiple ones followed suit, plunging the beast into a painful hell of shrapnel and blasts. Yongsu joined in on the fun, throwing multiple grenades of his own. Without concern for their infinite supplies, the duo exchanged their bullet hell for a more potent and volatile rain of man-made terror. At one point, it looked like they were finally gaining the upper hand and overwhelming the colossal monster. Smoke filled the air, limiting the visibility around the area. Yongsu was spent. He never thought throwing grenades would be such a hard thing to do. Jongyum's shoulders would have been dislocated if they kept on going. Yet after all the effort they put in and all the grenades they heaved, the beast emerged in one piece. It gestured to attack with its claw, but it was actually just trying to tap at the portal's barrier to provoke the duo. It took all those grenades like it was nothing aside from a little bit of its scales peeling off. Just what kind of monster are they really up against? The wyvern finally lost interest in trying to bypass the barrier and turned around. It flew off to the distance, obscured by the thick smog caused by the innumerable explosions. The duo watched and confirmed that the beast was finally gone. But one thing's for sure, that bastard did not leave because their attacks worked. All the explosions left a massive crater on the field, and they could not even make the enemy limp. Anyway, the enemy has retreated for now, and they should get moving too. With Yongsu's driving skills, riding out at night should not be a problem. They chose a small military jeep as a primary vehicle as they traversed the main road. The duo still can't shake the shock of facing that massive wyvern from earlier. Dozens of grenades exploding all at once can only cause some minor scratches. It was a clear and utter failure. They don't have enough firepower. If they happen to encounter an enemy stronger than that wyvern, what kind of weapon can they even use? Grenades are explosives, but they are designed for efficiency in killing humans, making their shrapnel more dangerous than the explosion itself at times. Jongyum considered using weapons with more explosive power, but those things are tricky to utilize freely. If he used a bomb stronger than dozens of grenades, the aftermath would be catastrophic. There is a possibility that innocent people can get caught in the blast if they're near a city. Also, even if the firepower is strong, there is simply no guarantee that one massive bomb would be enough to kill a powerful monster. From someone else's perspective, you'd become the monster. With that being said, Jongyum theorized an ideal weapon. Something as powerful as a bomb without causing collateral damage. Maybe the answer is launching something incredibly heavy or striking them at incredible breakneck speeds. Maybe both. In the end, using guns and grenades is the most realistic option for now. If he can keep upgrading his abilities, he'll eventually become more powerful. Since they just took down a ton of wyverns, Jongyum should have enough magic stones in the bank for some of those juicy upgrades. Much to his surprise, he had a lot more magic stones than he expected. A total of 314 to be exact. They piled up surprisingly fast. He felt the presence of multiple magic stones earlier. Maybe it was because of the big one. In any case, he has enough to splurge on upgrades. Using 25 magic stones, he increased his delivery launch speed from 100 km per hour to 150 km per hour. Another 25 magic stones went to boost his launch preparation time from 5 seconds to just 1. For something a little pricier, 50 magic stones were used to double the simultaneous launch capacity from 2 to 4. For another 25 stones, he also increased the launch range from 25 meters to 50 meters. He basically has a 1-second interval between launching 4 items. The number of magic stones required is astronomical, but the power is undeniable. After his hefty upgrades, he was left with 189 magic stones left in the bank. He had one more upgrade he has been eyeing for a while now. Spending another 50 stones, he finally unlocked the Pocket Dimension Laboratory. He had always wondered what the ability does. He wants to give it a try, but they would have to make a stop first if that's the case. So, he asked Yongsoo to pull over to take a short break while they checked on something. Yongsoo did not want to slow down or stop the drive as they were near Gangnam at this point. He urged the young man to go ahead and do his thing while he continued to drive. He should be safe since there aren't many monsters around on the road. If Jongyum's really worried, Yongsoo proposed that he just open the portal while they keep moving. The young man had never tried it before. After one trial, they found out that opening the portal to his subspace while the vehicle was moving actually worked. If anything happens, Yongsoo can just jump into the portal for safety, so there's no need to worry now. Finally assured that old man Yongsoo would be fine, the young man entered his new lab. It was a plain room made of uniform white tiles. Nothing seemed special at first glance. It's just a different space after all. Here he can use the combine to merge more than two objects while ignoring their physical condition. He can also separate a single object into its component materials. With combine, he can register a rifle with its magazine attached as a single item. Separate, on the other hand, would allow him to register a grenade with the safety pin removed. Common sense suggests that the thing would automatically explode if registered like so. But Pax explained that items registered in the pocket dimension exist in digital form while in storage. Unless used or ordered, no physical processes will take place with the item. And so, he registered the grenades with removed safety clips and pins for 15 magic stones. It might not be able to take down something like that giant wyvern, but it's certainly better than nothing. Tinkering and theorizing, he wondered if he should also register a rifle with a pre-attached magazine. It would be convenient if he could combine two magazines for uninterrupted firepower. Thinking even deeper, he realized that the lab could be used for something else other than guns and grenades. If he's right, he could actually create a new weapon for himself. The perfect armament to add to his arsenal. Something stronger than a bomb without causing collateral damage to the surroundings. Outside, Yongsoo stepped on the brakes upon seeing an odd display on the road. He looked at the crazy display of cars piled on top of one another to form a wall and wondered what the hell it was about. Just in time, Jongyum came out of the subspace. The drive had been uneventful so far, with no monsters chasing after them, but there was a more pressing problem up front. Somebody deliberately stacked the cars and completely blocked the road off. Breaking through would not be easy. Yongsoo had already resigned to their fate to turn around and find another way in, but the young man assured him that it won't be necessary. Actually, the weapon he just crafted would be a perfect answer to this problem. Before Yongsoo could ask about what he was talking about, the so-called new weapon had already been deployed. It was multiple barbell plates stacked on top of one another and merged with combine. With his recent upgrades, Jongyum can rattle off 4 of these bad boys at once, each of them flying about 150 kilometers per hour. In the face of the supremely heavy amalgamation of metal that would make any gym bro cry, the piled-up cars met their match. Through sheer force, Jongyum brought down the mysterious wall of vehicles. If someone's trying to block your path, just make one of your own by force. Yongsoo was speechless. Jongyum never fails to shock him time and time again. Looking at the 20-kilogram plates stacked on top of one another, he asked what on earth the young man had created. Some nobodies hiding in a dilapidated building watched in confusion as the wall collapsed before their eyes. From the rubble, the light of the military jeep emerged. Yongsoo drove in with speed and outstanding control, shocking the armed guards on the other side. The armed guards in question only had sticks and pipes to defend themselves, so seeing a military vehicle alarmed them. Jongyum rolled his window down and asked the survivors if his sister, Nurse Kim Joo-yeon, was nearby. A few years ago, the eldest of the Kim siblings was always left to deal with her rowdy sister and brother. She couldn't even focus on her studies for the upcoming exam. But then again, she had never been the studious and responsible type. Kim Sol even worried that Joo-yeon might be sick in the head. Jongyum asked if they should tell Mom about Joo-yeon's odd behavior out of concern. She usually found it tedious to sit in a chair for more than 30 minutes, so her sudden change worried the whole family. Even Mom chimed in to make sure that her daughter was all right. But the reason she started studying hard was that it was simpler than expected. According to her, she finally found her dream. Because of a little red book called The Apple Tree Story, she found her passion. According to Joo-yeon, even if the world were to end tomorrow, today, she would still treat the sick. Her impassioned speech earned a flabbergasted silence from the audience. The kids reckoned that her bizarre condition seemed to be getting worse. They should ship her ass to the hospital right away. But her determination was not just teenage bravado, not just a phase. Her grades steadily improved and eventually skyrocketed in high school. By graduation, she managed to get accepted into a prestigious nursing school. Fast forward to the present, Nurse Kim Joo-yeon stayed true to her creed. Even if the world has ended, she's still treating and taking care of people. Seeing her little brother in the flesh, her tears started falling as she asked how he made it as far as Gangnam. Jongyum was practically sobbing like a kid at this point, as he assured his sister that he wasn't hurt. Youngsu was pleased to see the young man finally reach one of his family members. The siblings embraced each other, glad that they defied the odds and stayed alive. After a few minutes of crying and hugging, Jongyum introduced Youngsu to his sister as a person who helped him a lot in his journey. Ever the most caring big sister, Juyun pulled out a chocolate bar from her pocket, thinking that her little bro must be starving, not knowing that he had access to enough chocolate bars to last a lifetime. But more importantly, they need to tend to a patient. Hearing that her expertise was needed, Juyun immediately demanded to be taken to the patient. Jongyum cleared up that the victim is in a space only accessible with his ability. Finding out that her little bro has awakened an ability pleasantly surprised her. Since he needs to open a door for the subspace, it would be inconvenient if other people saw the process. Moving secretly outside is impossible. In that case, it might be easier if they just head inside the hospital. Upon entering, Jongyum immediately caught a bad vibe with all the people living in subpar living conditions. Juyun directed them to the staff room. There, the young man surprised his sister with his absurd ability. Jongyum promised to explain in more detail later. But for now, the patient is their priority. Finally, they reached the room where the soldier was resting. Juyun performed some preliminary tests to gauge the man's well-being. It hasn't been long since they rescued the soldier on the way to Gangnam. The soldier was beaten and tortured, and his condition was far from good from the start. By conventional means, Han Hyung-ho might not be able to survive. Normally, he would be a lost cause. Fortunately, Kim Ju-yeon had also awakened her own ability as a full-on healer, fitting for her dreams. Her level is still low, so it might take a little bit of time. Furthermore, complete recovery will be hard, but he won't die. Ju-yeon stabilized the patient as much as she could for the day. It was equivalent to basic first aid, but more than the wounds, malnutrition is the bigger problem. Jongyum brought up her speech about saving lives if the world ended all those years ago, and it made her feel a little embarrassed. He even acted out the scene to mess with her even more. With the patient in stable condition, Ju-yeon demanded to hear her little bro's story thus far. Lee Young-soo's wife made some bread, so it would be perfect to get caught up over some food. Jongyum gave her everything straight right from the moment he awakened the subspace ability. He told her about how he met Pax, the all-purpose AI assistant. He also talks about how he came across a group of survivors, including Lee Young-soo. Juyun was barely listening to his voice as she was way too focused on the immaculate food on the table. She only listened to the introduction when he was trapped in the logistics center and muted the surroundings from that point. Juyun politely greeted Young-soo's wife. She totally fell in love with the housewife and her cooking. She's a wizard in the kitchen and was even kind enough to set up the staff lounge on the first floor of the logistics center. With beds and furniture set up, they can have a place to rest comfortably. Reminding everyone to get some more food if they want, Young-soo's wife exited the room. Juyun, who did not listen to her little bro's story, asked how Young-soo and his family ended up staying inside the subspace. He refused to repeat his tale. Long story short, he's on a mission to reunite the whole family. With Juyun found, they can now head to Iljiro. Kim Sol is in that city after all. Juyun apologized as she was determined to stay in the hospital. She's badly needed on site as there are more than 300 people gathered in the hospital. There are patients who need constant monitoring and medication. But that's not the real problem, as other nurses can take care of the patients too. The real issue lies deeper in this place. Right now, the man on the highest floor of the hospital is receiving reports of the two men who broke the wall and came in with a military vehicle. They don't know if they're special forces for sure, but they have confirmed that one of them is the younger brother of Kim Ju-yeon. Internal Medicine Department head Jin Seong-hak reckoned that the strangers won't be hostile. He believes that the two probably just needed food and shelter. Since Jin Seong-hak controls every resource in this place, they can control the new arrivals through food rations or through Nurse Ju-yeon. Besides, he is supremely confident that no awakened can possibly be stronger than his #1 henchman. And the veiny hulk of a man concurred. For now, the directive is to act warmly towards the newcomers. Act like they are extending kindness and all that jazz. As for the broken wall, the veiny henchman had already taken care of rebuilding it. He even stacked it higher this time. Back in the subspace, Juyun shared her theory that the survivors are being poisoned, as there are no other feasible explanations for people changing drastically overnight. Department head Jin Seong-hak probably awakened the ability to poison people in some way, gaining control over his victims. Most of the people who were awakened in the hospital were taken over, except Juyun. Those controlled victims are guarding the food and mana stones. Anyway, Juyun had been secretly siphoning off mana stones to strengthen herself. If she can level up more, she might be able to find a cure for the poison. So, she urged her little bro to continue his journey to find Sol and their parents first, while she finds a way to survive on her own. Of course, Jongyum answered with a simple no. She asserted that this was seriously dangerous. but the young man was stubborn. Since the weapon that Jin Seonghak uses to control the awakened is delivered through food, the answer is quite simple. Jongyum can easily take care of the problem with food supplies, and he wants his big sis to take a good look at the true extent of his ability. Since they have no time to waste, it would be better to get started right away. Just as she was about to reprimand him once more, Juyun's mouth hung open in shock at what she saw. Jongyum opened his portal, and boxes upon boxes of food supplies flooded the room. Jin Seonghak received an urgent report about Juyun's little brother bringing in some food, but he wasn't impressed. The messenger insisted that the amount was quite substantial, but the bastard remained unfazed. With just 2 people in one military vehicle, he doubts that they can bring in so much food. Soon enough, people will steal their food, and once it's all gone, they will come begging for rations like everyone else. Jin Seonghak reckoned that they should have just hidden their supplies and acted frugally instead of being generous. But this can work in the villain's favor in the end, as it would make things a lot easier than he thought. The messenger added that the newcomers brought in more than the entire hospital had collected so far. The revelation made Jin Seonghak's blood run cold. No matter how you think about it, it should be physically impossible for 2 people to bring in that much food for everyone. Their scouting team brought in the hospital's current stash. They gathered enough to fill an entire truck. Jin Seonghak considered that they must have the ability to replicate things or to manipulate the size of objects. Whatever it is, they definitely used an ability to secure those supplies, and the hospital needs to bring them into the fold. Jin Seonghak brought out his specialty drug and assigned the assignment of getting Juyun's little brother hooked on the drug to his strongest henchman, Song Hyun-gu. If it doesn't work, they can just kill the boy. There's also the other person, the driver. In the middle of the night, Jongyum distributed food to the inhabitants of the hospital. He's also on a quest to find someone in the crowd. He believes that meeting that person would make things a lot easier. A few minutes earlier, he shared his plan to neutralize all of Jin Seonghak's weapons. They can just dump the poisoned food and replace the supply, subdue the addicted ability users, and as for Jin Seonghak himself, he's not a combat threat at all. He tried to gather as much information as Juyun knew. The abilities of the addicted users were mostly useless crap. One can reseal open cans, and another has the ability to do laundry automatically. In general, not many people awaken abilities that are combat-oriented or threatening, except for one person in the hospital. His name is Song Hyun-gu, and one look at him would be enough to feel threatened. After the world turned into this mess, Hyun-gu came all the way to Gangnam from Iljiro, worried about his mother in the hospital. As for his ability, Juyun doesn't know much besides his being abnormally strong. The man is so huge that it's hard to miss him. The car wall that protected everyone was built by that meathead using his bare hands. Right now, that monstrosity has finally met Jongyum for a little one-on-one chat. The young man felt tense, but he actually had some business to settle with the muscle man, so this was perfect. Hyun-gu can't tell what type of business the young man could have with him, but that won't matter anymore. The two came outside, near the car wall that started it all. Muscleman calmly presented Jongyum with 2 choices from this point on. One is to willingly drink the medicine right here, right now. The other choice is to refuse and die a painful death. He highly recommended that Jongyum shouldn't try to run as it would be useless. Now it makes sense why the meathead dragged him to such a sketchy place. Jongyum wasn't planning to run away in the first place. He'd just get caught if he ran. So, he'd rather go with the secret third option. The option where Song Hyun-gu gets trapped right where he's standing. Angered by his blatant provocation, Hyun-gu lunged forward to grab and crush the young man in his hands. Before he could catch the young man for a beating, his fingertips came into contact with an immovable barrier. Jongyum was gone, and all he could see was a mysterious portal leading to the logistics center. Confused, Hyun-gu could not make sense of what he was seeing in front of him. When he finally noticed the drone flying in front of him, it was too late. Pax delivered a professional high-spin bowling ball straight to the musclehead's stomach. It knocked the wind out of the beast, as Jongyum wondered if the 90-km/h fast bowling ball was too much. Nevertheless, he can't afford to show mercy. He apologized and sent another heavy bowling ball straight to the brute's right leg. Just like that, Song Hyun-gu's mobility has been severely limited, as he groaned in pain. He angrily asked what kind of ability Jongyum was displaying, and he responded by launching one of his barbell plate stacks to the ground. The leg attack took away the giant's mobility, so Jongyum advised him to stay put. The barbell plate stacks have been slowed down even more, but it's still heavy enough to break bones and take lives if it hits. Song Hyun-gu refused to stay still and charged at one of the stacks, holding it between his arms. He tightened his hold, establishing a firm grasp on the stack. Jongyum was surprised to see the big man actually making his stacks move. The absolute monster of a man managed to lift the stack out of the ground, ruining Jongyum's Tetris game. While Hyun-gu was straining himself to lift one of the stacks, he failed to notice that he had already fallen for the metal trap. Jongyum apologized for making the prison a little cramped, and promised that he'd get Muscle Man out once everything's sorted out. All he had to do was hang in the middle of the heaviest prison ever conceived for a little bit longer. Jong Yum was on pins and needles, worried that he might seriously hurt the poor big guy. Thank goodness he was so durable. Back inside, Nurse Juyeon hurriedly let her brother in. She heard a loud noise outside and was worried that her little bro ran into that Muscle Man. The young man casually confirmed as if it wasn't a big deal. He pointed outside, letting his sister see where he left the main threat. Juyeon peeked and saw the bizarre metal structure and could not believe her eyes. Jongyum explained that Mr. Song Hyun-gu is his temporary prisoner. With the deadliest threat out of the equation, all they have to do is wait for Yongsu to arrive. Speaking of the devil, the best driver in the East finally showed his face. Getting a clearer view of Yongsu, the siblings were petrified. Mr. Yongsu was limping and clutching his head in pain. He was sweating profusely and complaining about an intense headache pounding in his skull. It was oddly similar to the symptoms of poisoning. The enemy must have gotten hold of Yongsu somehow. The last thing he remembers is handing out food to the survivors and receiving a few words of thanks. Juyeon noticed that there was a tiny prickle wound on Yongsu's finger. It must have been the delivery system the bastards used. Someone must have pricked Yongsu's finger with a poisoned apparatus. The culprit must have bumped into him while pretending to say thank you. For now, he needs to get some rest in the subspace. He'll have to be confined for a while. Jongyum did not expect that it would go down like this. He failed to protect his friend. They don't know how the poison works exactly, but if Yongsu is compromised, things will become a lot more complicated. They need to find Jin Seonghak quickly and find the cure. The break room in Sector 1 should suffice as a confinement room. Just in case, they'll have to block the windows and doors. Before Yongsu could even enter the portal, the system detected and blocked the unidentified energy attempting to enter from outside. Since the subspace is the user's independent domain, energy connections from the outside are not possible. Yongsu felt confused as he looked to the young man for answers. The debilitating pain in his head vanished just like that. All he had to do was put a finger in the portal, and the poison was neutralized. To test this hypothesis once more, they experimented with the most prominent poison victim, the imprisoned Song Hyun-gu. Jongyum opened a portal below the veiny muscle man's feet and granted him entry access. Hyun-gu fell into the subspace against his will. The young man quickly unregistered Hyun-gu after cleansing his system of the poison. When he reappeared back in the real world, his complexion looked a lot livelier. There's clarity and realization in his eyes, as if he had just woken up from the longest sleep of his life. He was completely cured and cleansed. The subspace is invulnerable to external attacks, but Jongyum never would have thought that it would block not just physical attacks, but mental ones too. The first thing Song Hyun-gu did after being cured was visit, hug, and apologize to his sick mother after way too long. He urged his mom to rest some more as he had something he needed to do. But he'll be back very soon. His sweet mom might not know what he's going to do, but she pressed him to be careful. Jongyum asked if the big man would be fine on his own, and Hyun-gu assured him that he would be. With his ability, it's impossible to even get scratched by ordinary attacks. Moreover, his memories from his time working under Jin Seonghak are so vivid that he feels ashamed and sorry for everything he's done. It's only fitting that he settles things with that bastard before he goes on with life. He promised to take care of the real cancer in the hospital quickly. Since the big man has the mastermind covered, it's time for Jongyum and the gang to focus on what they need to do. In Jin Seonghak's office, he was notified that a connection with a minion had been lost. He was surprised. He had his suspicions, but the worst-case scenario really happened, and the worst person just walked through the door. Song Hyun-gu's muscles bulged as it took all his willpower not to tear the bastard limb from limb immediately. Jin Seonghak doesn't know how their connection has been severed. But since it has come to this, he only has one thing to say. He smiled like a fucking asshole and asked Hyun-gu to spare him. The big man responded by using his arm as a hammer and the doctor's head as the nail, one tapping the fool to hell. While Mr. Song Hyung-ho left to wrap up things upstairs, the gang was discussing ways to clear the poison addiction of the other survivors in the hospital. Since there's no way of telling who's addicted for certain, it would be safer to just let everyone enter the subspace. It's already late, and some people are having trouble moving. Just putting a finger through the portal should be enough to cure the afflicted. It will be a ton of work, but it's a surefire way to treat everyone. Besides, they have no other options. But right as they braced themselves for an all-nighter, survivors all over the hospital started behaving strangely. Those who were afflicted stood up as though a heavy weight had just been lifted off their shoulders. Every poison survivor was inexplicably cured all at once. Those who were cured realized that they must have been out of their mind all this time. The gang was confused, but the arrival of Song Hyun-gu cleared everything up. His clothes and hands were stained with blood. It was obvious what method he used to settle his unfinished business. He lowered his head and extended his gratitude to Jongyum for saving everyone in the hospital. Jongyum also thanked the big man for eliminating the cause of the problem. He also apologized for firing some bowling balls too hard earlier. Thankfully, Hyungu was so durable that he only sustained some light bruising. His bones were miraculously fine. The big man had seen many monsters and strange phenomena since the apocalypse started, but seeing those plates fall from the sky to imprison him was truly bizarre. Even monsters can't compare with how fearsome Jong-yeom's ability truly is. When asked if he was planning to stay at the hospital, Jong-yeom was taken aback. Hyungu realizes that it may be selfish of him to ask for more help after all the young man has done, but the hospital would be safer with Jong-yeom around. While he understands, Jong-yeom is still on a mission to find the rest of his family, and they'll have to leave soon. Hyungu did not insist any further and wished him luck in reuniting with all his family safely. Since they're on the topic of family, Hyung-hoo came from Yeoljiro, so this is a valuable chance to ask about the situation in the city. The big man was shocked to hear that the gang was heading to Yeoljiro since it was impossible to reach that place now. A few hours later, a new dawn shined on the hospital and the survivors. Jong-yeom not only provided them with plenty of food to last a long time, but he also gave them valuable supplies like clothes and tools. The former enemies shook hands with mutual respect for one another as the big man swore to repay Jong-yeom's kindness. Finally, the gang left the hospital and drove towards Yeoljiro. Mr. Yongsu is back in tip-top shape as he drives flawlessly. He asked Jong-yeom about the wall around Yeoljiro that Hyungu mentioned, and theorized that it must be some kind of ability. If it is, the young man is banking on at least communicating with whoever put it up. Otherwise, they won't have a way to get past it. Last night, Hyungu gave them the rundown of what happened to Yeoljiro as he was leaving. It sounds absurd to even describe what he saw, but a wall really grew around the city. It sprouted from the ground like a tooth emerging. He didn't know the wall's exact size since he escaped as it was growing, but by now, he estimated that it should be as tall as an average skyscraper. That means ground travel is practically impossible. Breaking the wall might be an option, but it's uncertain. There's also something else that surprised Hyungu in that city. The types of monsters roaming Yeoljiro and Gangnam are a bit different. That place is mostly filled with skeletons. It would be more accurate to call them undead, as they kept coming back to life even after being killed. So, seeing corpses walking around the city was commonplace. Yeoljiro has monsters that don't die, and a massive wall to keep everyone out. It seems like a troublesome place in many ways, but Jong-yeom felt as though he did not need to worry about his sister, Sul, trapped in there. Rather, he feels like she would beat monsters even without awakening any power. From inside the subspace, he received a call from Ju-yeon, who finally agreed to tag along after the hospital was freed from the poison. He lazily asked why she called, and Big Sis immediately scolded him to fix his attitude. It turns out that the soldier he saves has finally regained consciousness. Jong-yeom hurriedly went into the subspace, and the soldier sincerely thanked the young man for saving his life. He introduced himself as Colonel Han Hyung-ho from the 50th Intelligence Communications Battalion. Thanks to Ju-yeon's diligent treatment, the colonel has recovered perfectly. Confused, the colonel asked where they were. He could see the military command outside, but the rest of the area was unfamiliar to him. There shouldn't be any buildings around the command, let alone a logistics center. Jong-yeom revealed that they were in the staff lounge of PAX FC Logistics Center inside his subspace. Outside, they're currently in Gangnam, heading toward Hanam Bridge. The newly recovered colonel had a hard time processing everything he had just heard. Ju-yeon simplified that they're inside the kid's ability in Gangnam. Upon hearing where he was, the colonel humbly requested to be let off on the road. Jong-yeom hurriedly assured the man that they had no intention of harming Mr. Han or anything like that. The colonel already knew that the gang was not a threat, as they were kind enough to save him from the brink of death. He can't tell them the exact reason, but he has a mission to reach the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the nation as quickly as possible. Jong-yeom understands that it must be a matter of national significance, so he called on Pax. Instead of letting the colonel off like he requested, the young man ordered his secret weapon, banana milk, and a sandwich. While he agrees to let Mr. Han off, he won't let the man go so easily. He handed the food to the starving soldier and asked for more details about his mission. The colonel resisted the temptation of food even though it's been ages since he had a decent meal. When Jong-yeom busted out the big guns, pizza, waffles, chicken, and all kinds of delectable dishes, it was game over. Mr. Han started spilling government secrets as he shoved food into his gullet. It all started one day when creatures from the other world started appearing all over the world simultaneously. By creatures from the other world, he means more than just monsters. Insects, animals, plants, and even geographical features like mountains appeared all over the globe. These creatures attacked and tore everything they saw, humans, animals, and even each other. They spared nothing and no one. With the emergence of these monsters, the government began recruiting the so-called awakened and formed a new unit with the recruits. They effectively handled the monsters with their otherworldly abilities. Mr. Han's unit was stationed near Gwacheon and Anyang, and it was stable for the most part. Things were going swimmingly until that beast appeared. He saw his men get slaughtered and eaten by the giant wyvern. Guns, grenades, and even shells were wholly ineffective against the behemoth. They repeatedly requested support from nearby military units, but everyone else was on the brink of destruction at the hands of other powerful monsters. The strange thing was they could contact Guaqin and Anyang during battles, but not even a sighting report came from the command. In the end, Colonel Han had to make the judgment call to retreat unless they wanted to get wiped out by the wyverns. They set eyes on the National Communication Command. As the monsters relentlessly pursued what remained of his unit, many of his comrades died. When they reached a city, they tried to recruit some awakened people to bolster their forces as they advanced. After many days of travel, they finally reached the base camp. As he expected, the place was already deserted when they arrived. The reason became clear soon enough. While searching through the command, they found some dubious documents. In those papers, the word coup was written and mentioned. A rebellion is underway. After that, Colonel Han tried his best to reach the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but the pesky wyvern trapped them in the base camp. To make matters worse, the recruited awakened killed every soldier and took over. Those were the gangsters eaten by the wyverns. The First Corps is likely stifling government efforts to gather troops, and the command's commander has sided with them. A rebellion in the midst of the apocalypse isn't even surprising anymore. Since the gang is headed for Iljiro, Jongyum promises to drop the colonel off as they cross the Han River Bridge. The colonel thanked them for their consideration as he continued munching on the gourmet meal on the table. Jongyum told Yongsu to start driving a little faster but not at maximum speed, even though the situation was time-sensitive. Now that he's thinking about it, Colonel Han reckoned that the young man must have encountered the wyvern in the military base too. Just as he was wondering how Jongyum managed to shake the persistent beast off, his eyes darted wide open in shock. He saw a fearsome ogre desperately trying to break through the portal's barrier, while Jongyum and Yongsu seemed unfazed. While the colonel was crapping his pants in fear, everyone else acted like it was just an average Tuesday. Suddenly, he saw a stack of heavy barbell plates fly toward the ogre, sending the poor beast flying to the heavens like a lifeless rag doll. Colonel Han watched in horror as the barbell disc stack spilled monster blood on the streets. Meanwhile, Jongyum and Yongsu remained nonchalant. They had long since become accustomed to such absurdity. The colonel, on the other hand, had stopped chewing his food in shock. When Jongyum deployed the military vehicle, poor Colonel Han almost choked right then and there. The dynamic duo went out of the subspace, and the young man just told Colonel Han to continue eating and resting like a good boy. They weren't far from the next destination, but Jongyum would gladly leave the portal open so Mr. Han could monitor the situation on the road. Launching pillars of discs at breakneck speeds and summoning military vehicles out of thin air is definitely an overpowered ability. The ogres that posed many headaches before were now simple trash mobs to kill in one shot. All Jongyum had to do was launch his thick stacks, and the monsters were crushed. Colonel Han was so enamored by the sight of the ogre slaughter that he had to take a closer look outside. He watched as each of the slain ogres' magic stones got sucked up into the subspace efficiently. The colonel doubted his eyes earlier, thinking that he must have been seeing things, but it was really happening. He saw it clearly. Those portals were sending heavy objects at high speeds to send the monsters to the afterlife. Enemies were falling at the rate of 4 per second, and those stacks could freely change direction too. Moreover, the collection of magic stones had been made infinitely more convenient with the simple automated extraction and retrieval. Everyone with eyes and a brain could tell that the subspace was an insanely broken ability if utilized like this. After a while, the crew arrived at Bampo Bridge. Unfortunately for them, the bridge had been destroyed by God knows what. Jongyum apologized to the colonel as their estimated time of arrival had just increased slightly, since they would need to find an alternative route. The colonel was just thankful they were helping him in the first place, and while they searched for another route, he'd just go back inside the subspace. Jongyum apologized for the delay, but it was already absurd that they reached Bampo Bridge from Gangnam in 1 hour. Considering the detour due to the collapsed road and the pesky monsters along the way, it was an insanely short amount of travel time. While the miracle of this 1-hour ride was partly thanks to Jongyum's ability, the one in the driver's seat deserved the most credit. Yongsu might look like a goof at times, but his skillful driving was the real deal. Just watching it from the passenger seat was dizzying. When the colonel first saw it, he was so startled that he nearly threw up in the back seat. He quickly learned that staying inside the comfort of the subspace would protect him from severe motion sickness. His assessment of Jongyum and Yongsu was stellar. Both were remarkable talents. After more driving and more monster clearing, the crew found themselves near another bridge. It looked like it was in poor condition, but at least it was still in one piece. Yongsu reckoned that he could drive through the whole length, but Jongyum was a little hesitant. The young man spotted some suspicious silhouettes from afar, which made him wary. Upon closer inspection, he spotted what looked like a fortress wall. It must be the rumored barrier of Yuljiro they'd heard about. With its size, there was no way they could get through it with a car. Since they were too far to say for sure that they couldn't break through, The wisest thing to do now was to go closer and see. If they passed through the bridge, they'd pass Young-san as well. In that case, they could drop Colonel Han off since it was on the way. After a few more minutes of uneventful driving, they arrived at the Colonel's drop-off point. He thanked the duo for escorting him safely all the way, even though they didn't have to. Jong-yum wished the military man good luck with his urgent business, and they said their goodbyes. Now the only remaining task was to find a way inside Iljiro to find his little sister. Earlier, the fortress wall had looked higher and sturdier than he had expected. Maybe leveling up enough to put the whole wall into the subspace could be a viable strategy if push came to shove. Unfortunately, he was still a long way off from the next level up. He could upgrade his tracking delivery enhancement to stage 2 using 50 magic stones, and with 400 stones collected per hour, he could probably grind for 2 more hours for a subspace level up. Colonel Han debated for a second and eventually proposed that Yongsu and Jong-yum join him. The government was providing support like mana stones to help initial growth for awakened people, and he reckoned that the subsidy would help the duo a lot, especially given how talented they were. The two would be guaranteed substantial support. While Jong-yum truly appreciated the offer, he was still on a mission to find his family, and family came first and foremost. As for the promised magic stones, they could just gather those along the way. The young man had no problem hunting down hordes of monsters after all. The colonel was dispirited. He knew that what Jong-yum said made sense, but if it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff headquarters, maybe he'd reconsider. He reckoned that the HQ must have a helicopter or two he could use. Colonel Han answered that they probably did have some helicopters lying around. Meanwhile, the HQ was abuzz with reports of Guachen and Anyang being destroyed. Even the 56th Division had been decimated. The only place remaining with somewhat intact forces might be the First Corps. Given the state of things, could a governing body still exist? All surviving military forces out there were truly in the dark. The director's pessimistic musings were interrupted by another messenger. Mr. Messenger came to inform the director that someone was here to see him. The commander of the 50th Battalion of the National Communications Agency, Colonel Han, had given his statement about how his entire unit was killed, and he made it all the way to the HQ with a message that he insisted must reach the director personally. Hearing the 50th Signal Battalion mentioned shocked the director to his core. Finally, Colonel Han was ushered into the room and delivered the most stalwart salute of his life. He recounted everything that had happened without omitting a single detail. And to cap the crucial report off, he handed the director a piece of paper. Written in the document was blatant evidence of rebellion involving the First Corps. Reading through the document made the director's stomach drop. He had been completely clueless about the undercurrents happening in the middle of this chaotic period. But now that he had been enlightened, he looked outside towards the men who had kept Colonel Han safe to deliver the crucial intel. The director and the colonel rushed down to thank Jong-yum and Yongsu for all the help they'd provided, praising the duo for the tremendous service they'd done for the country. Director had also heard about Jong-yum's abilities and his request for a helicopter in exchange for supplies. Helicopters were important strategic assets nowadays, but the director was willing to let go and deliver one for the young man. However, there was a condition he had to abide by. They would like to formally invite Jong-yum as an awakened member of the military. As everyone was aware, the government was struggling to stabilize the current situation. But if the young man joined forces with the military, they might find an unexpected breakthrough. Jong-yum apologized and reiterated that right now, there was nothing more important than rescuing his family. While it was unfortunate, the military couldn't just force him to join and forget about his mission. But in that case, the director couldn't let go of their helicopters. Ever the reasonable man, Jong-yum understood that it couldn't be helped. He wished the director luck in stabilizing the situation soon so everyone could return to a normal life. He gave a proper and respectful goodbye before hopping in his vehicle. The director was puzzled. He misplayed his hand so badly. He thought the young man would eventually cave. Unfortunately for these fools, Jong-yum was not out of choices yet. If the plan to cross the wall with a helicopter didn't pan out, he'd just find another way. Since he hadn't even properly checked the fortress wall himself, he was hopeful that he'd get through somehow. With the first offer failing, the director had to swallow his pride and knock on Jong-yum's window to extend one more request. If the young man could fulfill the request, the military promised to provide the helicopter he wanted. Jong-yum accepted, and a whole battalion was mobilized at once, with military trucks and vehicles lined up in single file. The young man found himself in the vanguard, sipping on his juice box as if he wasn't heading for war. He seemed bored out of his mind in the passenger seat. Moments ago, the director laid out the request about Seoul Station, the last place they assembled reserve-awakened individuals. Currently, the base camp can still communicate smoothly with the survivors at that location. The problem was that skeletons had clogged and blocked the road in between. Those skeletons weren't particularly threatening in terms of combat power. However, they were a nuisance in various other ways. Not only were there so many of them, but they were also tricky opponents. They possessed a core in the bottom part of the last right rib. If you failed to break that core in time, they'd just revive themselves endlessly. In short, Jongyum's role was to break through the hordes of skeletons and rescue the isolated awakened ones. And he was doing that pretty handily with his flying barbell disc stacks. The mission sounded simple enough for him after all. For the soldiers who were seeing his abilities in action for the first time, they could not believe their eyes. The operation the soldiers had been dreading for a while now was easily steamrolled by some random kid with a bizarre ability. They eventually reached Seoul Station, and the awakened survivors cheered at the sight of their rescue team. The military moved quickly and led the survivors to the armored trucks. After everyone was accounted for, the director gave Yongsoo and Jongyum the go-ahead to depart. The trucks carrying the survivors peacefully departed without any resistance. With Jongyum's ability, the skeletons were a breeze to handle. The poor soldiers had to fight those things with guns, requiring insane precision to destroy the core. However, there was another thing the young man should know about. There was something on these roads that was rarely seen. Among the skeletons, there was one that was on a completely different level. The military dubbed that thing the Skeleton Knight. The general directive in case of encountering the monster during a mission by any chance was to avoid engaging at all costs. Even if they needed to take some damage, every unit had to retreat immediately, for the monster was indestructible. As usual, Jongyum opened his portal and sent another disc stack flying at breakneck speeds. It was time to test if the Skeleton Knight really was invincible. The survivors of Seoul Station curiously watched the action from a safe distance, curious to see Jongyum's abilities. Even the soldiers could not take their eyes away from the spectacle ahead. Meanwhile, Jongyum and Yongsoo are starting to get worried about the enemy standing in front of their car. The Skeleton Knight just stood in the middle of the road menacingly, its piercing gaze fixed on the military convoy. Much to everyone's surprise, the monster started speaking in an unknown language. It sounded like gibberish to them, but it was definitely speaking and trying to say something. Finally, the Skeleton Knight lodged its sword on the ground and took out a magic stone from its pocket. It slowly crushed the stone in its hand, sprinkling the magic dust on the floor. After that, the Skeleton Knight magically started speaking human tongue, extending his greetings to the humans, calling them Otherworlders. He introduced himself as Sir Gawain, one of the 12 knights serving the Night King. However, Jongyum was more curious about that magic stone trick than the knight who had done it. It seems like magic stones can be used for other purposes. Gawain admitted that hurling hunks of steel towards him without warning was quite an interesting greeting, and asked if Jongyum was a mage. He also asked why the young man was interfering in a skeleton territory. While Gawain understands human impatience, given that the world is in the early days of the pioneering phase, he argued that business ethics must be upheld in negotiations between two parties. As a response to the Skeleton Knight's reasonable argument, Jongyum hurled another disc stack, which Gawain quickly slashed in half, reacting at lightning speed. He tried to tell Jongyum that these attacks were useless. Such weak spells wouldn't even do so much as leave a scratch on his armor. But Jongyum did not listen. Instead, he continued launching more hunks of steel. Gawain skillfully maneuvered his skeletal body around the attack, dodging with a perfectly timed roll. He stabbed his sword into the ground to regain a foothold, sending a counterattack in the process. The Skeleton Knight was pissed that the human's answer was unadulterated violence. Like the real Sigma that he is, Jongyum sent 4 more barbell plate stacks flying toward the poor Skeleton Knight. Gawain expertly parried the first one to arrive with his shield. He used his agility to dodge the next one and slashed the rest of the plates down, killing their momentum. The series of expertly timed dodges and attacks brought the Skeleton Knight dangerously close to the convoy. Yongsoo saw the menacing monster running at them at full speed and started panicking. Jongyum was just impressed that the thing in front of them could slice through 500 kilograms of steel like it's tofu. However, he can see that the Skeleton Knight is wary of getting hit, careful not to take any direct damage. If Jongyum can land some attacks, they should be golden. In that case, he bit his tongue and spent 50 magic stones unlocking tracking delivery for more accurate shots. As a test run, he launched 1 stack aiming for the Skeleton Knight's chest. The hunk of steel flew out of the portal like a giant speeding bullet. Gawain insulted him for trying the same trick over and over again, calling Jongyum stupid for a mage's standard. While he was boasting that he could dodge these stacks no matter how many were thrown, he was shocked to see the giant bullet shift courses in midair. Instead of the usual single-minded attack, this one actually homed in on the Skeleton Knight's chest, just as Jongyum ordered. Nevertheless, Gawain was able to tank the direct damage with his armor, parrying the stack away after being hit by the initial momentum. He warned the young man not to get so cocky, for he just let his guard down for a brief moment, and it won't happen again. But as soon as he lifted his head, a bowling ball knocked it back down to the ground. As usual, Gawain quickly recovered from the crash and lifted his head back once more. He could not see the ball at all, and it made him feel fear for the first time in a long time. The fear paralyzed the Skeleton Knight for a second, leaving another opening for another bowling ball traveling at breakneck speeds. This one hit the monster precisely in the skull. Jongyum did not let up. He continued launching bowling balls one after another. Inside the car, he was chanting left head, back head, front head, crown, right head, crown, back of the head, left head, front, and many more random directions like he was inputting a cheat code. With everything pre-aimed, he executed the auto-ship order. While the enemy was struggling with an endless barrage of bowling balls, Jongyum's jaw was hurting from blurting out all the commands at once. Thankfully for them, physical impacts still work, even though the skeleton was incredibly tough. With auto-shipment, they can at least breathe a little easier now. But the young man believes that they are not out of the woods just yet. That skeleton knight's armor is troublesome. It's much tougher than even the giant wyvern's scales. Moreover, Gawain is wielding a sword and shield with unparalleled skill. Considering all those factors, the skeleton knight is more threatening than a giant wyvern. That only made the bowling ball torture more brutal, though. Seeing the cracks forming on Gawain's entire skeletal body, Jongyum reckoned that they should send the rest of the military away while the enemy was still disoriented just to be safe. Thankfully, it seems like they don't have to do anything else, as Gawain's cursing turned to a pleading to stop the bowling ball barrage. Yongsoo can clearly see more and more skeleton fragments flying off in every direction. Seizing the moment, Jongyum ordered more shipments of disc pillars to simultaneously hit from the left, right, front, and back. The 4 heavy-hitting stacks spelled the end of the formidable skeleton knight. Poor guy got his skull smashed without even getting to show off his skills in proper close combat. But even in his last moments, Gawain stayed classy and praised Jongyum for being an impressive mage. Then he warned the humans that this is not the end. Far from it, for skeleton knights do not die, and even in death, everything they do and everything that they are is in service of the Night King. 3 shards of concentrated magic dropped from the kill. 2 big blue stones and 1 small red shard. Jongyum hurriedly retrieved the drops right into his portal. The system informed him that those were 2 large mana stone fragments and a reinforcement stone. The soldiers stuck behind the convoy could not believe what they just saw. That young man leading the pack just took down the skeleton knight that has been giving them a headache for a long time now. The skeleton knight, who did not even flinch when hit by tank shells, was done in by a bunch of barbell disc stacks and bowling balls. At the back, the survivors started happily chanting Jongyum's name for slaying the unkillable skeleton knight. Overcoming such a foe warrants a celebration. Upon arrival back in the HQ, the director got a rundown of everything that transpired and was astonished. He told the young man to retreat immediately if they ever encountered the harrowing skeleton knight, but that directive was clearly ignored. With that being said, defeating one is a better outcome than the director could have ever hoped for. This won't do. The military desperately needs both Jongyum and Yongsoo in their ranks. Mr. Director is done playing games. He's practically begging the duo to join their cause. Unfortunately for the country's remaining military forces, Jongyum cannot be swayed away from his quest to find the rest of his family. Thankfully, the director was a level-headed guy and backed down. But the offer still stands. He hopes that once Jongyum finishes reuniting with his family members, the young man would give the military's offer another serious thought. Right now, the armed forces already consider the young man an invaluable ally to the country. For now, it's time for the director to fulfill his end of the bargain and get the young man the helicopter that was promised as reward. Jongyum doesn't necessarily enjoy the high expectations being put on him, as it's just another added pressure, but he gets where they are coming from. He just finished taking down an unkillable and troublesome skeleton knight after all. Truthfully, he barely managed to pull the wind out of his ass. If there had been even one more enemy with a similar skill level to Gawain, they would have been cooked. Without a doubt, this rescue mission would have ended in a catastrophic failure. But the biggest issue here is that there are at least 11 more skeleton knights like Gawain out there. He called himself one of the 12 knights after all. There's also the ominous warning that skeleton knights never die, even in death. Jongyum reckoned that the Night King must be even stronger. It's time to reconsider his arsenal. Even the high-caliber rounds of pillar stacks he prepared barely did any damage. The bowling balls, on the other hand, were able to crack the tough armor. While it doesn't make sense logically, monsters in the world as a whole has stopped making sense to begin with. On the way up to the helipad, the director asked if the young man is really headed for Yujiro. As everyone can see from the HQ, high walls have risen up around Yujiro. The headquarters had already sent a unit to investigate the nature of these bizarre walls. Unfortunately, they've long since lost contact with the unit. Since then, they've been conducting aerial reconnaissance of the area inside the walls whenever possible. Through those expeditions, they have confirmed that there are still people active inside. The director believes that his troops must be safe inside the walls, and so is Jongyum's family. The young man appreciated his hopeful sentiments. Jongyum actually forgot that his sister could be in danger. If he's honest, he wasn't even worried about her. That girl is more of a monster than anything that he has ever encountered since the apocalypse started. Mr. Director also shared something peculiar they've noticed recently. The upper part of the wall seems to be gradually growing and curving inward as if it's forming a roof. They don't have an estimated time until it's completely closed off, but he's glad that they can lend Jongyum a helicopter before it does. Finally, after a long walk all the way to the top, the group reached the helipad. Jongyum laid his eyes upon a raggedy-looking helicopter that looked like it had just been shot down out of the skies. Did he go through the trouble of running an errand for the military for something so shitty? He tried to convince himself that this should be fine. Even though it looks outdated, he just needs something that can fly over the wall. Thankfully, the director redirected his attention to the other side of the rooftop. The helicopter Jongyum will be riding on is parked on the other end. Finally, he laid his eyes upon a pristine and badass-looking chopper glimmering as it reflected the light from the sunset. Both Jongyum and Youngsu were speechless, and Mr. Director smugly smiled as he could finally prove that he was useful too.